Today we're going to do some Necron bases. The particular base I'm going to work on is quite a large one. However, the principles will be the same for smaller bases as well. So first off, what we need is our Super Skorpekh. Because I'm doing a large one, I will need quite a fair chunk of this. Hence why I've got the big knife. However, obviously, if you're children, make sure some of these processes, like using a big knife, you get, an adult to do this. You don't want to accidentally hurt yourself, of course. To preserve the Skorpekh, I keep it in the fridge, which makes it go hard. So what I would suggest is to break it into some pieces, and you want to knead it with your fingers, and it helps it to warm up a bit and soften up so we can use it. Now we've softened it all up, we can press it all together into one big piece and roll it into a basic bowl. We want to try and get rid of these areas where there's these cracks, because that's just where the separate pieces are. Get ourselves something of a sausage. Next we want to use a plain rolling pin, and this time we're spreading it this way to try and spread it out. If you want to keep the thickness the same on both sides, what you could do is something like a piece of old cereal packet, and if that's not thick enough, you could just glue a couple of layers of this cardboard together, make one for both sides, and then when you put your roller over it, the roller can't go lower than the thickness of your cardboard, and that will therefore keep it the same thickness. Next, you want a piece of foil on the bottom. Put your Super Skorpekh on top, and after this, with a paintbrush, you want to apply some water all over the Skorpekh. And now we're going to use a different rolling pin. As you can see, this one's got detail on it, and the reason why we applied the water is so when we roll the pin over, it's not going to stick. You can see from this there's some parts on the outsides here where the rolling pin hasn't quite caught it, and that's because this area is slightly lower than that area, but that's fine. We can just get the knife, trim this piece off, and then we can reuse it when that piece in the center is already I've trimmed off the excess, and it won't get thrown away. We'll just get to reuse it. We've now got a nice chunk here with some detail, and this piece here now needs to be put in the oven and baked so it's nice and hard, and then I can show you the next stage. Now we've got a stack of these made, it's time to start attaching them onto the base. Just so you can see, stuff snaps quite easily, so you can just break pieces off into whatever shape you want. So this is going to give me a rough idea of pieces I want at the moment. I will mention though, some of these areas you've got straight lines, and those straight lines are going to encourage the breaks to go in the places where the lines are, because obviously the clay is slightly thinner. So if you want to try and encourage a break to go in a more specific place, use something which has got a flat side on it. In this case I use my file, and then break it across from the file, and therefore it helps to guide the shape. You're not going to get a perfectly straight line doing this. If you wanted a perfectly straight line, you need to cut it, but it just helps to guide the direction you want the break. Next, what I want to do in mine is keep the outside flat to the base, but the inside slightly elevated. And what I'm going to do with this is to apply some green stuff onto the underside and one side, just to lift it up slightly. Once you've done this, you can put it onto your base. Just got to remember when you're pushing it down to be gentle with it, because as you've already seen, the clay breaks fairly easy, so you don't want to put too much force on, otherwise you're just going to end up breaking it in places you hadn't intended to. This last piece, I've decided I don't need to put any green stuff underneath. So instead, just going to apply some super glue. The main thing to remember here is the pieces where you are using the green stuff to give it a slight bit of elevation. Make sure that the green stuff's not right on the edge, but leave it slightly further inside. And that way, when you're looking at it from different angles, you shouldn't actually see the green stuff. Also, try and pre-angle the green stuff. The point of doing this is to make it so it's sticking up. So on that side, have the green stuff slightly thicker from what you would on the inside. And if you do it like that before you actually try and press it down, it's more or less got its shape. Where if the green stuff's the same thickness both sides, then what could end up happening is you could end up breaking this when you don't want to. Now it needs to be left alone and given time to cure. Some of these outer edges, you'll want to apply some super glue and just press them down. I've literally, because there was gaps, I've literally just fed the super glue and let it run in, and then just pressed it, hold it there for a few seconds. Like I said, that's just so you can get like it's lower on the outside, higher on the inside, to give you that elevation in the center. Now, means we've got all these leftover bits, add a little bit of super glue onto the back and place a few of these bits in some different places just to give it a little bit more detail. But what I want to do is in this center piece, I want to leave that, and we're going to do something with that later on, but we have to start painting it first before we can get to that stage. You can see here I've got lots of leftover pieces, and I've also still got some of the larger pieces that I haven't even broken into yet, but they won't go to waste because we can use these on some of the smaller miniatures. But at this point we'll need to give time for the super glue to dry, and then we can start the next part of the process. For the next stage, we want to apply some PVA glue and then start sprinkling in some sand, and this, when it's dry, will represent parts of this which is broken down to very small fragments. But again, we don't want to apply it onto the inside area here. This stage now needs to be left to dry for at least an hour. After that, rub your finger around the outside lip just to get rid of any of the excess sand, and then we're ready to start painting. Next I'm going to start painting the base, but first, have you remembered to subscribe already? If not, please subscribe. We've started off with a lead belcher, and next using iron breaker. I'm using a large brush. You don't want too much paint on your brush, so I've actually wiped some off on my hand, and you want to briskly wipe over the area. You should notice it's just slightly bright on this side than it is there where I've just applied it, look. But you're not trying to apply a lot of paint, you're just trying to apply a small amount. This is our next coat, and the same applies as the last coat. But because you're using the same brush, make sure you've got all the water out of your brush. You want your brush to be as dry as possible. And again, I'm not painting it like this, I'm doing it like this because I'm trying to catch the top rather than getting inside all the details. And just a quick wipe over is all you need, and it adds a slight variation in the colour. Next I'm using the Necron compound, and I'm using a flat brush, and this is just used to catch these very edges. And so you don't miss any, I suggest you pick one section and go around the whole section before you move on to the next section. Next, I've got some old Mithril silver, which this is an old paint. They don't actually make this anymore because they did the Necron compound instead, but I'm sure you'll find a similar colour somewhere. And what I'm going to do with this is there's some areas when this piece has got glued in, they cracked slightly. So I'm going to use this silver to add a slight bit of a highlight into those areas. And it doesn't have to be too precise. And also, I thought I'd add a few extra lines to represent areas where it's already started to crack up. As you can see here, there's one of those lines put in. There's another one. So it just shows potential areas where, although you've got these areas where it has broken up, this just shows areas where it's ready to start cracking and breaking up, you see. For these metal areas, because it's for the Necrons, I want to make it look as if the metals have got a kind of an alien element to it. Or put it another way, a metal which is not normal to us. So I'm going to use 3 shades. These are small ones, so they used to be called washes, but they're called shades now. So I've got a green, a blue, and the crimson one here. Now in using these, it's going to actually tarnish the silver. When they're initially applied, they look nice and shiny, but once it's dried, it'll actually dull this silver colour down. I would suggest that you only want 1 coat. You don't want to put multiple coats on. It's just going to end up making the colour of the silver, instead of it looking normal silver, it'll give it a bit of an alien look. Next, I've just made a mix of 4 parts lime medium to 1 part moot green, and we're going to apply this onto these inside edges. But I only want to apply it onto the inside edges on the areas where this main big crack is. I'm not applying it onto these areas. I won't be applying it here. I just want it on these cracks. To make the glow on the inside here, you want some water texture acrylic. Then I'm using the moot green. You only need a small amount of the green here. It's just to change the colour of the water effect. You can see I've already actually applied 1 coat, but it does take several coats. You just slowly feed it in. Once you fed it in like this, you might want to coerce the flow in a few places. And make sure none of it's on the top of the and afterwards we start adding in your crystals. As you see, I've already put mine in. This water effect creates a kind of a rubbery skin, so you don't need to glue the crystals in. The actual water effect itself will hold them in place. For this stage of the glowing green that you put on the inside, you'll most likely want to put a couple of coats in. The reason why is some of it will actually sink into the inside here where you won't actually see it. I think the end result looks good. I wanted to make it kind of look like there's tectonic plates that are breaking up. The crystals are coming out from underneath the ground with this like glow coming from underneath, and I feel that the overall project worked quite nicely. I've got 2 others here I can show you as well, so you can see a little bit of variation. And with these 2, they've actually got some flying stands attached to them. You can see the one on the left has a big open area, but I think they've turned out quite nicely. Remember that if you've enjoyed the video, remember to click on the subscribe button there on the bottom right hand side, and I'll see you on the next video.